Man, the trees are doubled over outside. It is blowing so hard. It's cold and windy. It's going to get colder. I'm going to head to the cabin in a couple days. I hope to hang out there on the sheepskin rug, stare at the fire, and go into deep synthesis. Synthesis, by the way, is theurgy, or the reproductive process of disobjectification. I kind of find it humorous, not literally like accusatorily humorous that people ask, how does that work? The first part is I tell them logically that you can't think your way out of a thinking box, because that's what everybody does. You can't think your way out of a thinking box. Anyway, I wanted to expand on this in the future. I was actually in deep synthesis not too long ago, and I had a profound revelation. I hate to use that word because that sounds bad. I'll edit that out of this video. I don't want to use the R word. That creates a problem. But I think about the nature of nature itself, or natura naturans, and it must necessitatively, there's that word again, ananke in the ancient Greek, necessitatively, which means it can't exist any other way, be divinely simple, and it must be divine and simple by definition. Regarding galactic jets, by the way, everybody talks about the Big Bang Theory and string theory. Did you know that the Big Bang was dreamt up by a Catholic priest? All these people who are hardcore materialists and atheists have been parroting this insane idea of a Big Bang, which was dreamt up by an armchair scientist. I use the word scientist loosely. The people who call themselves scientists are the most heinously ignorant people imaginable, by a Catholic priest. I find that fascinating. String theory nor a Big Bang are either plausible or correct, and they're certainly so laughable. You have something that must overcome the greatest energy that the universe has ever seen, and send apart a mass. It's like, well, where did the mass come from? So you start with the mass. Everything about the Big Bang view of the universe is completely implausible. It's illogical. It doesn't follow retroductive logic. It doesn't follow induction. And it sure as hell doesn't follow Occam's razor of simplicity. It's completely asinine. So it doesn't surprise me at all that a Catholic priest came up with this idea. However, what does surprise me is all these clueless materialists and relativists, parroting that idea. They glommed onto it. They stuck to it for reasons that aren't necessary here. But anyway, I'd like to seek your, not that I seek confirmation for what I'm about to talk about, seek your position on this. And it hasn't all unraveled in my head. It's kind of like a book that you have on your shelf. It's all there, and you've skimmed through it. And by truth and the position that you stand in, that you're not interested in imposing your beliefs or your views upon something that, wow, this is incredibly validly true. And this would, of course, apply to energy generation. However, we could never build an energy generator with such incredible power. The nature of black holes, and of course, I know when you talk about black holes, people say, well, they don't exist. Well, they do exist. Also, too, necessitatively understanding the conjugate nature of dielectricity and magnetism, and that the only reason anything exists in the physical universe is due to magnetism and magnetism only. That's the only reason anything has mass and magnitude. As you're correctly taught, every atom in the universe is essentially 99.9999999% empty space. Kind of like the biggest balloon in the world. Imagine a balloon the size of Los Angeles, and the nucleus are like a couple marbles, or even smaller than a marble, right at the center of that balloon. The notion that it's empty is completely ridiculous, because every atom is nothing other than a dynamo of magnetodielectricity, and the reason why it has volume is due to magnetism and magnetism only. And of course, to overthrow, as I've accurately said, the only thing a black hole is where dielectricity is overthrown magnetism's ability to keep all that mass and matter within the visible universe. So all the matter is there, and by extrapolation to, of course, the mass, it hasn't vanished, but it has vanished from the physical universe. It is still there. Then the question becomes, you should look this up. It's called astrophysical jets. There are also two called galactic jets. It doesn't matter what you call them, and we have countless pictures of them. They're all over the place. It turns out we now have images of the galactic jets, which are not in a plasmatic state of our own Milky Way galaxy. They're being emitted at the geomagnetic precessional axis of the black hole that is at the center of this galaxy and probably most galaxies, including irregular shaped galaxies, emitting trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen out into the universe. Now, hydrogen, of course, is the most fundamental particle, and all atoms are compounded hydrogen. I mean, that's very simple. If you want to talk about Mother Nature being a hairy armpit chick with a hemp skirt and muddy feet, with dreadlocks, no calculator, no slide rule. She doesn't do math, she does arithmetic, and arithmetic is not math. Everything works off of pressure mediation. How can we then, therefore, using abductive and retroductive logic, divinely and in simplex terms explain the nature of the generation of matter? Because all matter is compounded hydrogen, and all hydrogen is ultra high energy light. I said this years ago, many times in countless videos, and it was recently proven. They actually used coherent lasers, a pair of which I know it was at least two, and at ultra high energy they would spontaneously generate matter, i.e. hydrogen. Fascinating. I don't know how many amplitudes above that of gamma radiation that hydrogen is manifest, but probably 30 or 40 magnitudes above that of gamma radiation. That's all matter is, I say humorously and also too accurately, which is hard light or high energy light. And that's correct. At such point, of course, it is a ZTP, or you say a zero-time particle. It doesn't manifest or demanifest and blink in and out of the universe in the case of light with a set frequency or wavelength. We have the case where the capacitance is so high that there is no longer a temporal wavelength or frequency. Yeah, I'm getting to the point here in the nature of the universe where we can actually completely dismiss string theory. We can certainly dismiss the completely illogical and absurd notion of the Big Bang, such that the matter making of these cosmic jets or galactic jets, they're also too called astrophysical jets, pick your term. You could Google search countless images of galactic jets or astrophysical jets, where these super enormous energy centers are replicating themselves. Now, I had thought about this deeply. Are they actually spontaneously generating hydrogen? The answer is yes. But the question is it an ab extra matter generation, or is it merely the recycling of the compounded matter that actually fell into these energy voids? And void, of course, is an incorrect term. We say black holes, we could say energy voids, but people get caught up on words. They really get lost and tripped up on them like a speed bump. They're able to see past the words and look at the principles and the symbolism and the ideology of what these things are, the essence of what they are in themselves, and stop people say, oh, black holes don't exist. Well, let's just not call them black holes. Well, we have to communicate verbally. We're not going to sit here and communicate telepathically. So what is it about these ultra-high energy centers that are literally, and you can see them, spitting out trillions and trillions of tons, even more than that, megatrillions of tons of hydrogen, which is just high energy light? Okay. Is it spontaneous generation, or is it recycling of the matter that's already there? It must necessitatively be ab extra spontaneous generation of the hydrogen, ab extra to the mass that's at the center of that energy nucleus. We say black hole energy nucleus. Doesn't matter what we say. And we know that these, because we can actually see them being ionized, adding to the accretion disk. Imagine a wheel, because it is hard to explain this in simple terms verbally to a person. You have to understand, the two geometries of the plane of inertia, the hyperboloid and the toroidal geometry. And you can see these galactic jets that are literally going around just. And that's all a torus is a conjugate vortex, as I've said many countless times. They're actually being emitted at the geomagnetic axis of the plane of inertia of the center of that galaxy or of that supermassive black hole. Absolutely fascinating. So this energy pinch is a matter generator. It is literally generating its own accretion disk and adding to its own size, at which point, of course, it must reach an entropy where it is maxed out. Imagine a wheel whose center, which is nothing if you actually take the axis out of a wheel, that the center of that wheel whose energy density is so incredibly high that it is literally adding to the size of the wheel. Imagine the center of a wheel that is spitting out trillions of tons of hydrogen, which of course flows around the toroidal geometry. And of course, like in the case of our galactic center here of the Milky Way galaxy, is pouring around towards the plane of inertia, because our Milky Way galaxy, for example, just as one example among millions that we've seen, such as in the Hubble Deep Space Deep Field View, where we actually pointed the Hubble telescope at the darkest point in the sky and looked as deep as we possibly could. And lo and behold, within that deep field view, and you could download that image, thousands and thousands and thousands of galaxies, just in the smallest part of the darkest region that we pointed the Hubble in, which of course is very fascinating. It's extremely fascinating if you think about it, that we can completely dismiss Big Bang, we can completely dismiss string theory. We have nature's own free energy device where it is literally feeding itself. Its own geometry is spontaneously generating matter, hydrogen, and all matter is compounded hydrogen. That's undeniable. Hydrogen is high energy light. All matter is compounded hydrogen. But the specific geometry and energy density of the center of these energy centers, we say energy center, black hole, who cares? Stop getting caught up on words. Think about the principle that we could dismiss the insanity of string theory, dismiss the radical insanity of this Big Bang nonsense. There's countless books now that have pointed out the thousands of holes in the Big Bang theory. One book is called The Big Bang Never Happened, which is true. It's completely ludicrous. Once again, dreamt up by a Catholic priest, no less. Yeah, he was a priest, yeah. He was an older guy. So, these matter-making black holes or energy centers are replicating themselves. They're acting as an energy nucleus for spontaneous matter generation, spontaneous energy generation. They're literally feeding themselves, and if you actually take this to the fullness of what it implies, is that the universe generates by nature of its own geometries of these energy centers, not recycling its matter in the case of the trillions of tons of hydrogen that's being emitted, which superficially is logical, but spontaneously generating more matter. That's absolutely fascinating. It's divine, it's brilliant. If you have an energy geometry and density that's so high, it is literally a self-replica, kind of like the gremlin, right? You get a gremlin, I don't know if you ever seen the old movie Gremlin, where you get the gremlin wet and, a little babies start to pop out of its back, and those little babies, you get them wet, and then more little gremlins pop out of their back, which of course is completely ludicrous. Of course, we violate conservation of energy, where one little gremlin can spontaneously pop out 20 other gremlins. It's a humorous science fiction movie. It's meant to be funny and humorous, but as a humorous analogy, that's what nature's geometry is doing. That's fascinating. You should take a look at the countless images of astrophysical jets. People have not thought deeply about the implication of what those are. It's high energy light. They're being emitted literally at the geomagnetic precession. You ever spun up a compass? A compass, you spin them up, a little kid's toy, it starts to precess like this. That's, by the way, that's Lamore frequency, or geomagnetic precession. That's why these trillions of tons of hydrogen are being emitted at the geomagnetic precessional vectors of the conjugate geometry of a torus, which is a conjugate vortex. That's all a torus is a conjugate vortex. And why is it a conjugate vortex? As I've explained countless thousands of times, magnetism is a three-dimensional force vector of the loss of energy or inertia. So literally the exit sphincter, which I say that humorously, the orifice of the orifice of these energy centers, which must necessitatively only be at the axis of geomagnetic precession, is being emitted trillions of tons. So these like in the case of our Milky Way galaxy and these other galaxies, the nature of their geometry as such and in simple, and this is beautiful and it's divine, it literally is the word divine, are feeding and growing themselves. Imagine a creature where there is nothing to eat and nothing, period, other than that creature, such that the creature has a geometry of itself where it is able to feed and grow itself. And of course, that doesn't exist in reality, right? I'm using this as a thought image, a thought symbolism. Imagine a creature, if it has a certain geometry, generates matter that feeds itself and grows itself. Literally, nature is self, and of course, this is the divine symbolism throughout all ancient cultures, that not only is nature self-feeding, but self-generating. So this specific geometry is self-generating and also, too, self-feeding. People have always thought, in these so-called scientists, well, galaxies form and collections of gas get together and blah, 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 blah. Well, superficially, that might seem accurate. But the truth is that these galaxies are expanding by nature and accord of their own geometries. They're emitting, excuse me, trillions and trillions of tons. I don't know what on timely basis, not over time, but over short periods of time, trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. We can't conceive of that. Human beings, we have no parallel for it here in this world. We're like a creature, generates its own food, and it eats its own food that it itself generated. It's kind of like the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail, which of course is ridiculous, you know, can't take that to the fullness of the image, you know, eventually the snake is going to vanish, right? It's completely impossible, a snake can't eat itself. But a creature that generates its own food, eats that own food, grows bigger, and by nature of it being bigger, it is able to generate more food and eat that food, you know, it's completely superficially, by nature, the way human beings think, relational to all the stuff that exists in our world that we view every day, we can't conceive of something like that. Yet it is both hyperlogical, hyper-rational, and it is due to the nature of the ether and that specific field geometry which manifests endless trillions of tons of hydrogen. Therefore, these galaxies are not only collections of gas and dust and planets and stars, blah, 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 which of course they are, but the geometry of which at the center, and also too different places along, it could be irregular galaxies, spiral arm galaxies, or different shaped galaxies. They are not only self-feeding, but they're spontaneous generators of that which they feed upon. So our galaxy over time will continue to expand. It will reach a point which it can't expand anymore, but it will continue to feed and expand itself by nature only of its own geometry. I mean, you want to talk about divinely simple, in the case of Occam's razor and explaining nature and the conjugate geometry of her fields. It's brilliant. That actually spontaneously jumped into my mind in a state of a theurgy and synthesis. It's kind of startling, and I knew instantaneously that it was correct, and yet, even though it was clear within my head, it's like, well, how do you give analogies to this? How do you verbalize it and vocalize it, since we don't communicate via telepathy, right? Most of us don't, right? It's like, how do you verbalize that in a video? Because it's extremely divine. It's actually beautiful. That's the stuff that I live for, to see the simplicity and divinity behind that which is most fundamental and natural. Because I've known my entire life Big Bang was a crock, string theory is a crock. They're all illogical, they're all self-defeating, they're all completely insane. It's ridiculous, but that is nature and simple. Tell me what you think. I could expand on this much, much more, but I wanted to make this video because it's been incredibly uplifting to see that, and yet, even though the vision is clear, it's like, well, how do you explain it? Even to make this video, it took a while. Well, how do I actually talk about this, you know, and give shape to the principles of these geometries, the conjugate geometries, and now how they're they generate their own food. I use food in a loose term. Generate their own food and feed on that food, because we have no parallel for that, you know, here in our life. There's no animal that makes its own food. You know, there's no gremlin, you know, that spontaneously creates 100 more babies when you get it wet. That violates conservation of energy. And we have to ask ourselves, where is this energy actually coming from in the case of these super energy centers that spontaneously generate trillions of tons of hydrogen, which is the basis for all matter. And it's coming, of course, from counter space, the ether. You say counter space, I don't like that word even though I've used it countless times. But it's coming from the ether itself. The ether, under subject of that special geometry, will spontaneously, and it's not a recycling of matter. It's like, well, in the black hole there's all this matter, it's been recycled, it's been broken down and recycled. That's why it's spitting out trillions of... No, that's not what's happening. It is spontaneously generating ultra-high energy light, which of course is hydrogen. As I humorously call it, hard light, which is both humorous and accurate, really. Not that hydrogen is hard, but all compound constituents of atoms are nothing other than, all atoms are nothing other than compounded hydrogen, which of course is also undeniable. Anyway, I hope I didn't drone on too deep in this video, so I apologize. And thank you so much for watching. I love this robe. It's so nice when it's cold and windy outside. It's very, very comfortable. I need to make another one of these, but I can't find the fabric. Thanks.